Thank you. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for being here, despite the rain. There's a word that I have neglected to mention to you, which I should have from the beginning, and that is in Italian contrappasso. Did I mention it? I can't remember. No. So contrappasso means counter passion or counter suffering or counter step. And it is simply the principle that the punishment fits the crime. So in hell, we saw how the punishments are all adjusted to the particular kinds of crime and sins that people were committing. And the same is true in the Purgatorio, that the form of purgation from the sin has to do with the particular sin, and that general idea is called contrappasso. Tonight we're beginning with Canto 19 and the Dream of Cyrena. And so I want to read to you this dream. Remember that there are 3 nights that Dante spends on Purgatory, and each time the sun sets, motion is impossible. You can't go up. So they stop and they have a conversation, which is to avoid wasting the time, and they learn things. And then Dante falls asleep and has a dream. And each time that happens. So you remember the first dream was of the eagle coming down and plucking him like Ganymede up. And then he woke up and he found out it was St. Lucy who had picked him up to the next level to prepare to go through the gates. Now they've been through the first 4 Cornices, and Dante falls asleep and he has the following dream. It's line 7 of Canto 19. There came to me in a dream a stuttering crone, squint-eyed, club-footed, both her hands deformed, and her complexion like a whitewashed stone. That is death. I stared at her, and just as the new sun breathes life to night-chilled limbs, just so my look began to free her tongue, and one by one drew straight all her deformities, and warmed her dead face till it bloomed as love would wish it for its delight. When she was thus transformed, her tongue thus loosened, she began to sing in such a voice that only with great pain could I have turned from her soliciting. I am, she sang, Cyrena. I am she whose voice is honeyed with such sweet enticements it trances sailing men far out to sea. I turned Ulysses from his wanderer's way with my charmed song, and few indeed who taste how well I satisfy would think to stray. Her mouth had not yet shut when at my side appeared a saintly lady, poised and eager to heap confusion on the Sirens' pride. "Oh, Virgil, Virgil, who," she cried, "is this?" Roused by her indignation, Virgil came. His eyes did not once leave that soul of bliss. He seized the witch, and with one rip laid bare all of her front, her loins, and her foul belly. I woke sick with the stench that rose from there. And Virgil says, I've called you 3 times, so get up and let's go. All right, so who is this Cyrena? You remember that we have come through 3 Cornices, the first 3 Cornices, pride, envy, and wrath, and those were the forms of defective love, love of the wrong thing, love of others' harm, specifically. And then we came through the wrath, the cornice of sloth, and that was insufficient love of the true good, that is, insufficient love of God. And now we're entering the last 3 cornices, and they are excess love of secondary goods. So who is this Cyrena? The Sirens, you remember from the Odyssey, were these beautiful creatures who sang and drew men to their deaths on the rocks by singing irresistibly. And Odysseus knew about them. I think Circe had explained the danger. And so he said to his men, tie me to the mast and don't let me go no matter what I say. And And you guys put wax in your ears so you don't hear the singing. So that's what happened. And he wanted to get free. He wanted to go after the siren. And they wouldn't let him. And finally, he gets out of her range. And he realizes that what he's been told was true. So what does she mean in the allegory? Dante is explicitly refuting the Gnostic idea, the heretical Gnostic sect of early Christianity held that the created physical world was the source of evil, that it was the home of the devil, and that the human soul is good and the body is evil. And so there's this perpetual war between our souls and our bodies. And that's how they located the drama of good and evil. And the church rejected this doctrine. Augustine goes through elaborate efforts to clarify what becomes eventually the doctrine. And the refutation of that idea is simply Genesis, where it says God saw all that he had made and it was very good. So how can the created world be bad? It isn't. So what does she represent? She does not represent the love of food or people or possessions, because in right measure, the love of those things is fine as long as they are subordinated in the hierarchy to the love of God. And so what she represents is excess love of secondary goods. Secondary goods means not God, anything else but God. And the interesting thing is that Dante looks at her and she's ugly and old and deformed and repulsive, but as he looks, she becomes beautiful. In other words, his looking turns her into this irresistible figure. And this means that the source of this excess love is not in the things themselves. It's not in worldly goods. It's not in food and drink. It's not in beautiful people. It's in the false relation to them. She is at first unattractive. She only acquires strength and beauty from Dante's own gaze. She is therefore the projection upon the outer world of something in the mind. The soul, falling in love with itself, perceives other people and things not as they are, but as wish fulfillments of its own. Marcel Proust made his whole oeuvre based on this idea, that you don't really ever love somebody, you're only loving a projection of the self. And he's right to the extent that perverse kind of love can be that, but not that all love is that. The soul, falling in love with itself, perceives other people and things not as they are, but as wish fulfillments of its own. That is, its love for them is not love for the true other, but a devouring egotistical fantasy by absorption in which the personality rots away into illusion. And the rot comes from something that Richard of St. Victor said. I just read it this evening in his theological thing called the 12 Patriarchs. He's a 12th century theologian. And he said, "For the whole earth does not suffice to satisfy the appetite of sensation." Just think about that a second. For the whole earth does not suffice to satisfy the appetite of sensation. And this is the source of what we mean by addiction, because people imagine that more satisfaction of this sensual appetite is going to make them happy, and it can't. So, the siren is in fact the ancient witch Lilith, the fabled first wife of Adam, who was not a real woman of flesh and blood, but a magical imago, begotten of Samael, the evil one, to be a phantasm of Adam's own desires. According to rabbinical legend, God, seeing that it was not good for man to be alone with himself in this fashion, created Eve to be his true other, and to be loved and respected by him as a real person. In later legend, the magical phantasm of man's own desire is the demon lover called the Succubus, or in the case of a woman, the Incubus, intercourse with which saps the strength and destroys the life. The lady is not Beatrice or Lucy or any other person. She prompts Virgil, who is reason, but she cannot herself unmask the siren. She symbolizes something immediate, instinctive, and almost automatic. One might call her an intuition, or perhaps the reflex action of a virtuous habit, whose instant warning puts the soul on the alert and prompts it to think rationally about what it is doing. She talks about Charles Williams' novel Descent into Hell, and then she quotes Father Gerald Van, who says, "If you exalt the objects of your love until your picture is a false one, if you idealize them, if you project upon them your own ideal self, then you are loving not a real person but a dream." Okay, and that's the transition now to the three cornices of excess love of secondary goods. So the first one is avarice. And he sees Pope Adrian and he bows to him, Dante does. And he says, Pope Adrian 136 says, "Straighten your legs, my brother, rise from error. I am like you and all the others, a fellow servant of one emperor." So in the world, you bow to the Pope, but in purgatory, you don't. You bow only to God. It is written in Holy Scripture, neque nubent, neither are they given in marriage. If you ever understood that sacred text, my reason for speaking will be evident. He is the image of covetousness in the form of ambition, covetousness for control and power. And he's using Latin, which is the language of the church. They neither marry nor are they given in marriage. Every bishop, including the Pope, is ceremonially wedded to his see, which is why he wears a ring and changes his name to that of his diocese. But this marriage, like any earthly marriage, is dissolved in heaven, together with all legal and official ties and all earthly rank and privilege. This holds good despite the sacramental nature of the ties of marriage, orders, and unction. For in heaven there is no longer any need of sacraments. What are sacraments? What are they? They're those mini incarnations in our behavior in the world and in the church that have a mystical, transforming, spiritual efficacy or power or significance. But they exist only so far as we live in this life, in the flesh, in time and space, where we need those incarnations, where we need a material form in which to practice the meaning of these sacraments. And once we're out of the material body, then they're not necessary anymore. All right, Canto 20, we get Hugh Capet or Capet after the lust of spiritual power, the lust of temporal power. Pope and emperor are alike victims of the ancient wolf. Worldly ambition is accompanied by a more literal covetousness for wealth and possessions, with the inevitable manifestations of cruelty, callousness, and meanness exemplified in the history of the House of Capet. These souls are fettered, they're bound, face downward on the ground, abasing themselves and having to face the thing they worshipped, which was the ground, which was the material world of things. I just want to read this about Boniface VIII. Let's see. It's Canto 20. He says at line 85, Canto 20, "But dwarfing all crimes past or yet to be, I see Alanya entered, and in his vicar Christ himself dragged in captivity. So this is the French come in, I think it's the French come in, and they attack the Pope, Boniface VIII, who's this evil Pope that Dante hates and is meant for hell. But he's the Pope. And Dante says, I see him mocked again and crucified, the gall and vinegar once more sent up. He dies again with live thieves at his side. Talking about Christ. So the Pope embodies Christ being attacked. Because they went into the palace and they grabbed the Pope and they manhandled him, and then he died a few months later. So Sayers says, nothing in Dante is more paradoxical or more magnificent than his treatment of Boniface VIII. Of all his enemies, personal and political, none is so hateful to him as Boniface. Yet stained with simony, with murder, with treason, with the rape and robbery of the church and the ruin of the empire, his see usurped so that it now stands vacant in God's Son's sight, the tomb of Peter made by his means a sewer of filth and blood, a scandal to all heaven and a delight to the great apostate. Nevertheless, Christ's vicar is Christ's vicar still, identified with him in the sacrament of his anointing, and to lay hand on him is to crucify Christ afresh. This balance of two equal and opposed indignations, both blazing and mutually unmitigated, is a triumph of the passionate intellect, unsurpassed in literature and scarcely paralleled. Okay, well, that's Dorothy Sayers praising Dante, but you see why. So all those people who say, oh, he puts in hell his enemies and he puts in heaven his friends. No. Boniface is the worst of his enemies, but Boniface as Pope may not be attacked. And therefore he is as outraged by the attack on the office of the Pope as he was outraged by Boniface's destruction of the church. Okay. Now, at Canto 20, line 124, there's suddenly an earthquake. We had already left him to his prayers and were expending every ounce of strength on the remaining distance to the stairs, when suddenly I felt the mountain shake as if it tottered. Now, remember how high up they are. So the thing is 3,000 miles high at the top. So they're about 2,000 miles up or more at this point, with no parapet at the edge. They're walking by these people stuck on the ground, and there's the abyss. And there's an earthquake. Such a numb dread seized me as a man feels when marching to the stake. All right, so what happened? Glory to God in the highest, rang a shout from every throat. We stood there motionless. Yes, we stood there motionless is... I'm in Canto 20, towards the very end. He's desiring to know the meaning of this earthquake. Now, why is it a problem? Because they're above the level of the gates of paradise, so natural phenomena like earthquakes don't happen here. It's not nature having an earthquake. There's no lightning up here, there's no thunder, there's no rainstorm, unless it's a form of the penance. So he meets a soul that has just come up from the cornice below, and says, line 22, Canto 21, line 22. My teacher, then, you cannot fail to see if you observe the angel's mark upon him that he will reign among the just. But she whose wheel turns day and night has not yet spun the full length of the thread that Clotho winds into a hank for him and everyone. Therefore his soul, sister to yours and mine, since it cannot see as we do, could not climb by itself. And therefore will divine has drawn me out of the great throat of woe to guide him on his way. This is Virgil explaining what's going on. Why is Dante alive? To this soul that just came upstairs. But tell me if you can, says Virgil, because he doesn't get this. What was the shock we felt just now? And why did all the mountain cry with one voice down to its last moist rock? Dante says he struck the needle's eye of my desire. That's what I want to know. I'm glad you're asking. So the shade, that's this soul, this airy body of the soul, we're going to hear more about that, answers. The holy rules that ring the mountain round do not permit upon it any disordered or unusual thing. It's not a natural earthquake. It's not the earth shaking because it's got trouble. Nor any change. Only what heaven draws out of itself into itself. Again, that and nothing else can be a cause. Therefore, there never can be rain, nor snow, nor hail, nor dew, nor hoarfrost higher up than the little 3-step stairway there below. Those 3 steps of penance, remember? Neither dense clouds nor films of mist appear, etc. Shocks may occur below, severe or slight, but tremors caused by winds locked in the earth, I know not how, I don't know what causes earthquakes, do not reach to this height. It trembles here, I'm at line 58, whenever a soul feels so healed and purified that it gets up or moves to climb. And then the great hymn peals. The soul, surprised, becomes entirely free to change its cloister, meaning go to the next level, moved by its own will, which is its only proof of purity. Remember, the soul moves when it's ready, when the stain of sin has been purged, and it knows it from inside. Before purgation, it does wish to climb, but the will high justice sets against that which moves it to will pain as it once willed crime. Remember, I quoted you, Dorothy Sayers quoted St. Thomas Aquinas talking about the difference between penal punishment and purgatorial punishment. So the soul in purgatory, in an absolute sense, doesn't want to suffer because nobody wants to suffer, but in a particular sense wants to suffer this kind of suffering because it purges of sin, and then the reward is great. So that's what he's saying right here, explaining that. And I, who in my torments have lain here 500 years and more, have only now felt my will free to seek a better sphere. So, who is he? He tells us at line 91, his name is Statius. He sang of Thebes. So who's Statius? Let me give you a little background. AD 45 to 96 was the author of the Thebaid, an epic on the history of Eteocles and Polyneices, the 2 brothers of Oedipus, and the War of Thebes, and part of an Achilleid about Achilles, together with a volume, the Sylvae of occasional poems, the libretto of a pantomime, the Agave, now lost but mentioned by Juvenal, and a poem on the German wars of Domitian. That's the Roman Emperor Domitian, also lost. Dante's admiration for this poet of the Silver Age was a standing puzzle to the older school of classical criticism, but modern scholarship tends to take a more favorable view. C.S. Lewis finds in his work the first beginnings of allegory as a literary form, and this may help to account for Dante's interest in him. Dante wished to show the soul as being accompanied and helped on its journey not only by old Rome, natural humanism, that's Virgil, but also by new Christian Rome, redeemed humanism, and that's what Statius represents. Maybe Dante invented his conversion to Christianity, or maybe there was some source, but we don't know for sure. So Statius is going to be a co-guide with Virgil. What human reason, unilluminated by grace or by revelation, doesn't know, human reason illuminated by revelation and grace can answer. And so that's what we get in Statius. Now, Statius explains at line 94, very dramatically, who he is. Now, he doesn't know who these people are in front of him. He's just telling them because they're souls and redeemed. The sparks that were my seeds of passion came from that celestial fire which has enkindled more than 1,000 poets. I mean the flame of the Aeneid. He doesn't know who he's talking to here. the mother that brought forth the nurse that gave suck to my song. Without it, I could not have weighed half a penny's worth. And to have lived back there in Virgil's time, I would agree to pass another year in the same banishment from which I climbed. By the way, he's spent this time on the previous Cornice of avarice, not because of avarice, but because of the mirror sin, which is prodigality, wasting money. Remember, we had hoarders and wasters in hell, and we can have avaricious and prodigal in purgatory. So if I could live back then, I'd spend another, how long? Another year in this purgatorial suffering. Virgil, at these last words, shot me a glance that said in silence, silence. But man's will is not supreme in every circumstance. For tears and laughter come so close behind the passions they arise from, that they least obey the will of the most honest mind. Even the most honest mind can't help weeping at certain things or laughing at certain things. I did no more than half smile. Here's Virgil telling him not to say anything. So he half smiles. But there nothing's hidden. So, but that shade fell still and looked me in the eye, for there the secrets of the soul are most betrayed, in the eye. So may the road you travel lead to grace, he said. What was the meaning of the smile that I saw flash now across your face? Now I am really trapped, says Dante. On either side, one tells me to be still, one begs me to speak. So torn, I heave a sigh, and my sweet guide understands all its meaning. Never fear, he says to me, speak up and let him know what he has asked so movingly to hear. Okay, Virgil says, go ahead. There's a legend that if, the ass that has 2 bottles of hay and can't decide which one to eat, and so he dies, he starves to death, because he can't decide to eat this one instead of that one. And there are many iterations of that idea. And it was a problem in logic. What do you do when you have 2 equal draws in opposite directions? How do you decide? So in this case, Virgil, who represents human reason, is giving him permission to decide between these 2 impossibles, or impossible to fulfill both. So Dante says, perhaps my smiling thus has made you marvel, ancient soul, but now listen to something truly marvelous. This one who guides my eyes aloft is he, Virgil, from whom you drew the strength to sing the deeds of men and gods in poetry. The only motive for my smiling lay in your own words. If you conceived another, as you love truth, pray, put the thought away. He, Statius, was bending to embrace my teacher's knee. But Virgil, and we already heard, right? They're not given in marriage, or they don't marry and aren't given in marriage. You don't kneel to any other soul. You're all brothers and sisters under God. So Virgil says, no, brother, shade you are and shade am I. You must not kneel to me. And Statius, rising, said, so may you find the measure of the love that warms me to you, when for it I lose all else from my mind, forgetting we are empty semblances and taking shadows to be substances. All right, we come then to the next level, which is the Cornice of Gluttony. Dante says, how could a person of your wisdom and knowledge, a great poet and so on, be avaricious? And Statius says, no, it wasn't that, it was prodigality, line 37. Yes?
When I read this, I didn't connect with the way you just read it, and I realized this sin here is defining sin as prodigality, but how does that, it sounds like excess love
Of?
the way you read it, of Virgil, and how does that relate, if at all, to the sin? I didn't, again, until you reread it, I just thought, well, he's really impressed, he's starstruck by Virgil. It really sounds like that's a depiction of excess love.
Yes, it is. It's not a bad one. There's nothing evil in it. Yeah. He's admiring Virgil for his worldly contribution, just as Dante was bowing his head to Brunetto Latini. But
It feels like an idol. It almost feels like there's a form of idolatry.
it would be if it were allowed to continue, but reason prevents him, right? Virgil says, don't do that. And oh boy, it just shows you how much I have you in admiration that I could forget where we are and do that. So it's an error, but it's an innocent error. It's an error driven by a positive thing, and then he corrects it because he's.
There's more to make of it here, but yeah.
I mean, there's more. Any question you raise here, there's more to make of. Okay, I am teaching you the surface of Dante. There's no way I can go into everything, and I don't even know how to go into everything, but I know that I could have spent 9 weeks on one canto if I were talking about everything that Dante brings into it. I'm reading a book now which is absolutely impenetrable, and he keeps doing that. He keeps referring this in the language and this idea, and this comes from so and so. You know, there's about as much written about Dante almost as about Shakespeare and the Bible. It's endless. So I wish I could satisfy your curiosity, but I'll send you where you can read. Yeah.
This episode is the only one I can recall that's really comic. I mean, if you played this out.
No, the demons in the level of the grafters, in the bulge of the grafters, was pretty comical too, although they were scared, but for us it was comical and the language was foul. Here, it's comical in a higher sense. It's not slapstick, it's irony.
It's pretty funny.
Yeah, and it's also sweet.
Virgil there and Statius there, and you can just imagine Dante thinking, you've got to be kidding me.
But it's also, allegorically, it is an instance of the nature of knowledge, right? What's the relation between, first of all, between poetry and vision, and poetry and reason? And then what's the relation between the unredeemed humanist poet that Virgil represents and Statius, who is now graced? And it's perfectly clear that Dante thinks that Virgil's the greater poet. There's no question about that. But Statius is the greater in the sense that he has been given this conversion, this transformation. So there's all kinds of layers about the nature of knowledge and Dante's instruction. And he is also saying that Statius recognizes the superiority of Virgil by this little comedy. So it's like the Boniface thing. It's both things at once. Like the conversion of Statius is a great thing, and the preeminence of Virgil is a great thing, and they're not the same thing. They're both great. One doesn't completely supplant the other. All right, we have to keep moving because I'm never going to make it. On the level of, we come to the level of gluttony. And there's this tree, and it's backwards. So trees have a trunk, and then their leaves spread out like this, and then they narrow at the top. That's the usual form of a tree. Think of a pine tree, let's say. Well, this tree is wide at the top and narrow at the bottom. Why? If you try to pick fruit from this tree, you can't reach it. It's way up there. And what's reachable is just the trunk at the center. And what's on this tree? So the whole thing is an image of the tantalizing. And the penance for gluttony, what is gluttony? Gula. Excess love of the sensual pleasure of eating and drinking. The sin of gluttony is specifically an undue attention to the pleasures of the palate, whether by sheer excess in eating and drinking or by the opposite fault of fastidiousness. So those people who go crazy, oh, I don't touch this, I can't eat gluten, I can't eat that, it's got to be this, I got to go to, I can't. More generally, it includes all overindulgence in bodily comforts, the concentration, whether jovial or fretful, on a high standard of living. It is accordingly purged by starvation within sight of plenty. It's the Tantalus problem. So in the old mythology, in Hades, Tantalus is in water, and he gets thirsty, and the water is coming up to right here, and the minute he leans down to drink, it goes away. And then he gets hungry, and the food comes down, and the minute he tries to reach, it's pulled away. And it's horrific if you think about having to live through that or be in it eternally. It's bad enough that you're hungry, but then there's the food, and you almost can reach it, but no. Since gluttony tends to be on the whole a warm-hearted and companionable sin, often resulting from and in a mistaken notion of good fellowship, it is placed higher than the egotistical and cold-hearted sins, like avarice. Now, the punishment is starvation. And what do the souls look like who are doing their penance for gluttony? They look like, they illustrate the principle that God writes his name in the structure of the human face. So Dante says, those who read Homo Dei in the face of man. Homo, O-M-O, is uomo, man. Dei means of God. So if you draw O-M-O, D-E-I, what do you get in my bad drawing?
A monkey.
O-Mo, Dei. You see it? Well, it's a bad drawing. That's my... I think there's an illustrated, there's one in your book too. I'm not showing it to the world. It's too badly drawn.
Oh, that's pretty good.
Yeah.
Very low tech.
This is very low tech. So Chardy has one picture of it in the book, and Sayers has another, and neither of them either is very great. But the point is, they're starving so much that you see the bone structure of the face. And therefore you can read Homo Dei in the face because it comes clear because there's no flesh on their bones, or not much. Okay. Canto 24. So there's this tree, and there's water coming down. The punishment of the gluttonous closely resembles the torment allotted in the classical Tartarus to Tantalus, who stole the food of the gods. In Homer, he stands in water up to the chin beneath a laden fruit tree, but when he tries to drink, the water sinks from his lips, and when he tries to reach the fruit, it is carried away by the wind. The punishment by hunger and thirst captured the imagination of the Middle Ages. It nearly always figures in popular pictures of hell, and even in illustrations to the Inferno, in which it has no place. Dante having substituted for the wallowing in mud, and for it, the wallowing in mud and the cold rain of the third circle under the teeth and claws of Cerberus. On the sixth cornice, Dante has retained the image of the water and the tree, turning the former into a sparkling cascade, doubtless emanating from the twin spring of Lethe and Unoe. We'll see those rivers later. And ingeniously making the latter a scion of the tree of knowledge. This tree, this upside down tree, is growing out of the side of the cliff as a sucker, as a root stock from the tree of knowledge, which is going to be up at the top in the garden, in the original garden. So it links the sin of gluttony with the sin of Eve and the fall of man, all for an apple which he took. By another dexterous economy, he uses this penance as a springboard for Statius's discord in the next canto on the nature of the soul. And that's what we're going to come to now. I wanted to mention the sweet new style. So at line 50, where am I? Canto 24, line 57 or so. All right, so he comes and he sees Bona Giunta of Lucca uttering a prophecy. And then he questions Dante about the sweet new style and ends by concluding that he and others of his school grasped the principle of natural expression. They would have written as well as do the poets of Dante. So this is the previous school of poetry, and he's admiring his successors who developed this thing called the dolce stil nuovo, the sweet new style. So the sweet new style is the name used to designate the work of the Florentine school of poets who founded their theory and practice upon the example of Guido Guinicelli of Bologna, or Guinizelli. He's going to be in the Cornices of Love pretty soon. He wrote a famous ode, "Ah, gentil cor ripara sempre amore," love shelters ever in the gentle heart. We find the first authentic expression of the new doctrine, which conceives love purified of its sensual elements as a power of divine origin inseparable from true nobility of soul, and in the modern phrase, sublimating the passions. To this poem, Dante pays tribute in his early sonnet, and then she lists other poets. It was left for Dante to arrive at a completely successful resolution of the antinomy always implicit in the courtly doctrine by accepting sexual love at its most exalted as one symbol and manifestation among many of the divine love which moves the universe, and into whose beatitude all lesser loves are taken up and there fulfilled. This conception, first adumbrated in the new life and further developed in the banquet, convivio, reaches its final expression in the Paradiso. So what is the relation between our love of worldly things, and in particular of people, to this rejection of the excess love of them and the irresistible draw of love in the soul? What's really going on here? All right, so now we come to Canto 25. And we get Statius's discourse. They come up to the seventh cornice. No, they're coming up to the seventh cornice, which is the purgation of excess love of persons, otherwise known as lust. And Dante asks, how did they grow so thin, these people we just saw below, starving? The punishment of the lustful, which we'll talk about, I guess we should talk about it first, is fire.
What?
Fire. We haven't had that much fire. Brunetto Latini was being rained on by some fire. The fire of love and the fire that purges love are the same fire. By contrast with the common run of eschatological writers, Dante is strangely economical in his use of fire. Even in hell, the naked flame makes only 4 appearances and is never unaccompanied by some touch of greatness and squalor. Yeah, Farinata, remember, is in that tomb, and there's fire in the tombs. Fires are the way that Ulysses speaks out of a flame. On the blissful mountain, the traditional purgatory fire is conspicuous by its absence. Only on its last and highest and most triumphant cornice does this great scriptural image blaze out with a sudden, splendid lucidity. For he is like a refiner's fire. The firing pot is for silver and the furnace for gold. The words of the Lord are pure words, even as the silver which from the earth is tried and purified 7 times in the fire. Fire, which is an image of lust, is also an image of purity. The burning of the sin and the burning charity, which is its opposing virtue, here coalesce into a single image and a single experience. Here, where the souls of great poets go singing and weeping through the flame, the noblest of earthly lovers is purged and set in order. So they climb up to this cornice. Now there's this much space between the wall of fire and nothing, right? 3,000 or nearly miles high. And they're walking along the cornice. And they're seeing in the fire the souls of those being purged of lust. They repented before they died, of course, so they wouldn't be here at all. And there are 2 groups of people. There's one marching this way, the right way around, and there's one marching this way, the left way around. And as they pass each other, they give a kiss. And it's not a lustful kiss, it's a kiss of peace. So the people going this way are what he calls hermaphroditic, meaning what we would call straight, and the people going this way are people who are homosexual or some other form of bestial love, but they repented. So they're both being purified in the same fire. They're just going in these different directions. And as they pass each other, they give the kiss of peace. Okay, now.
I may not think of the kiss of peace when I go to Mass next Sunday quite the same way.
Well, should you? All right, I want to say something about the mystery of the erotic relation of male and female, because I want to forestall any objections to the Dante's science of genetics here. Every human being knows that the relation between male and female is a mystery. Nobody completely understands this, yet we're all products of it. We have to live it one way or another, and we have to address it, and we wouldn't exist if it didn't exist. But it remains at root a very, very deep mystery. And the Bible illustrates a kind of doubleness in the relation between male and female. There are 2 versions of the creation story of man in Genesis. The first one, God creates man and woman. Boom, they're both there. And that implies a concept of something like equality or equivalency. And then a few verses later, God takes Eve and draws her out of the side or the rib of Adam and forms her to be a helpmeet for him. And that implies a kind of hierarchical relation, so that there is authority for both ways of thinking about the relation between men and women, that is egalitarian and hierarchical. Now, mostly the Middle Ages thought in terms of hierarchy. So when we get to Dante's genetics, we're going to have the seed from the male planted within the female, and it has the formative power. And it takes what it finds there as its content or as its medium and shapes it into a human being. And our age has decided that's not fair or right. And in fact, we believe that the DNA carried by the sperm and by the ovum are equal in creating the human being. Our science reflects our image of the social world too. You know, we want equality of opportunity and the right to vote and everything else that goes along with thinking of men and women in egalitarian terms. Now, both these images of reality have a kind of authenticity or authority, as I said in Genesis. And so now when Dante talks about the way that a human being is made, I want you to think in terms of DNA and think in terms of the formative power. We still believe in it, and we don't know where it comes from. We don't know why DNA works the way it works. And we don't know why this fetus turns out to have XY chromosome, and this one turns out to have XX chromosome. We don't understand this. Nobody knows. They've mapped the material process, but how that process, or why that process happens as it does, nobody knows. So we still have these two images, these potentially two images of the making or the birth of a human being. So I'm going to read Dante's lecture, it's Statius's lecture to Dante, to explain how those people on the Cornice below were starving, looked like they were starving. You could read Homo Dei in their faces. And also what's going on in this fire. So he's going to tell us what we are in a very kind of physiological sense. I'm in Canto 25, line 37. Perfect blood, that pure blood that remains, as one might say, like food upon the table, and never goes to slake the thirsty veins, acquires within the heart formative power over all human organs, as that which flows into the veins forms them. Now, formative power, so Dante imagines that the begetting of a human being begins in the heart of the father, of the male, with pure blood. He calls it pure blood. And in the heart, it takes on formative power. And then it flows down to that place the better left unmentioned. And thence it drips over another blood in its natural vase. So he's talking about sexual intercourse. There the two commingle. And one blood shows a passive bent, that's the female's blood, and the other, while the other is active. That's the formative principle from the male, due to the perfect place from which it flows. So joined, the active force within the latter first clots, then quickens what it has made firm of the former blood to serve as working matter. Okay, so the formative principle carried in the sperm is working upon the material principle in the ovum and forming it into a person. The active force has now become a soul like that of a plant, but with the difference that this begins where that achieves its goal. Okay, I'm going to stop there and read a little bit of background. The modern reader who finds Statius's long discourse a little boring may be helped to endure it by A, considering how full of interest it must have been to Dante's contemporaries, and B, studying the remarkable skill with which the poet has fitted together his scientific and theological jigsaw. Purporting at the outset to be simply a plain answer to a plain question about the apparent bodies of the shades, the discourse leads up naturally to its real subject, which is the origin of the rational soul and the nature of the human body-soul complex. On its way, it contrives to provide the curious inquirer with a handy guide to embryology, an explanation of what it is we see when we see ghosts, and the solution of various problems which have presented themselves in the course of the poem. For example, how the dismembered profligates and schismatics are able to reunite their seeming substance, and so on. Why is Virgil able to carry Dante, but his arms go right through Casella. We may also admire Dante's tact in timing and placing his discourses, which he never permits to dislocate the action of the story. All right. So the semen is considered to be blood in perfect condition without the impurities which give venous blood its color. The whole physiology of the passage is based on Aristotle. The heart is the organ which imparts formative power to the blood, whether in the veins to build up the limbs through which they run, or in the semen to make the body of the embryo. After undergoing a second process of purification, it descends to the male genitals and is sprinkled in the vulva, or perhaps the uterus, upon the blood of the female. The theory that the female's part in generation was purely passive was almost universally accepted until very recent times, when it became possible to distinguish microscopically the action of the genes in sperm and ovum. Popular psychology, she says, and popular moral standards still remain surprisingly faithful to the scientific theory of the 3rd century. This is Dorothy Sayers, feminist, saying this. But as I tried to show, this discovery, this genetic discovery through the microscope of how things work, also fits our modern idea of equality. So our own jigsaw puzzle fits together too. So the soul that it's become, like a plant, is called the nutritive or vegetative soul, anima vegetativa, such as is found in plants, which live and grow and feed but are without consciousness. Medieval scientists were quite aware of the recapitulation of the race history in the embryo, though they did not deduce from it a doctrine of evolution. They would look upon it rather as a recapitulation of the days of creation. But the idea of the anima vegetativa comes from Plato, who imagines, I told you, I think, 3 souls in us. Dante refuted that when he was further down below, and his attention was called away, and he was refuting the idea of 3 different souls. And he's returned to that idea here. So the 3 souls are the vegetable soul, the sensible soul, and the intelligible soul. So right now, this embryo is it's got a vegetable soul. It grows. Soon, line 55, like some sea thing, half beast, half weed, it moves and feels, and then begins to form those powers of sense of which it is the seed. Okay, so it starts to grow, and it begins to have bodily organs and gain an animal soul, anima sensitiva, the sensible soul, which not only alive but also conscious, though not self-conscious or reflective. That requires the intelligible soul, but aware of the world, aware of desire, aware of taste. Now, my son, says Statius, line 58. The formative power expands and elongates within till every member takes form and place as nature's plan commands. Okay, 5 fingers on this hand, 5 fingers on that hand, legs longer than arms, etc. But how this animal thing grows human powers you do not yet see. And this very point has led astray a wiser head than yours. He's talking about Averroes, I believe. By him, the possible intellect was thought, since it occupied no organ, to be disjointed from the vegetative soul, and so he taught. So the idea of Averroes was that there was no such thing as a rational and immortal individual human soul. There was only rationality, this universal, almost Platonic form of reason, which then showed itself in particular human beings. But they did not have reason as individuals themselves. We're just experiencing participation in rationality when we're thinking. And Thomas Aquinas refuted this, and so did others. Because it takes away from the human being responsibility for the choices that depend on rationality and free will. Okay, remember we talked about free will. So he says, Statius, line 67, open your heart to the truth I shall explain, and know that at the instant articulation has been perfected in the fetal brain, that is, once the body is ready for it, and it doesn't say when, which is why the church is opposed to abortion. Because you're killing the human soul, you don't know when that soul gets breathed in to the fetal body. The instant articulation has been perfected in the fetal brain, that instant the first mover, that's God, turns to it. And there, rejoicing at such art in nature, breathes into it a new and powerful spirit. That is, the individual human soul is the direct creation of God. All that is active there, that is everything that is grown there with the vegetative soul's powers and the sensible soul's powers, this spirit draws into itself, forming a single soul that lives like a plant and feels like an animal and measures its own cause like a rational being. Consider if you find these words of mine too strange to understand how the sun's heat, joined to the sap of the vine, turns into wine. Okay, you got grape juice, right? It's not wine, it's grape juice. And you put it in the sun, and a little while later, it's not grape juice, it's wine. How did that happen? Fermentation, transformation, the turning of this substance into something else. That's what's happening when God breathes the soul into this fetal brain of the fetus, and it takes all those powers and unites it into a single thing. Then, all right, so now there's a lifetime, and we're going to skip all through that. And then when Lachesis flax is drawn, that is you remember the three who measure out the strand of life, measure it and spin it and measure it and cut it. Lachesis is the one who cuts it. It frees itself from flesh, but takes with it the essence of its divine and human faculties. So when you die, the soul survives the body, and and in that soul are all the faculties that were given to that soul that it united in itself. Its lower powers grown passive now and mute. Okay, you're not using the physical power to grow and the physical power to sense physical things, because you're outside the physical world. But memory, intelligence, and will more active than they were and more acute. The higher powers, the powers of the intelligible soul, are more acute. Not hampered, not hemmed in by the body. Miraculously then, by its own will, it falls to one or the other shore. Remember the two shores. So there's the shore of Tiber, those are the people going to Purgatorio in heaven, and the shore of Styx, those are the people going to hell. And by its own will. In other words, how has it lived its life? What has it chosen? Has it repented before death? There it first learns its way for good or ill. And once enclosed in that new atmosphere, now, this is going to explain what we're seeing when we see ghosts and what we're seeing in these airy bodies of all these souls that are suffering apparent physical phenomena, either suffering in hell or purgatory. Once enclosed in that new atmosphere, the formative power of that individual soul rays out as it did first in shaping the bodily parts it left back there. Then, as the air after a rain will glow inside itself, reflecting an outer ray, it's talking about the rainbow, and clothe itself in many colors. So you look at a rainbow. What is it? There's cloud there, and then there's the sun shining on it, and suddenly the cloud isn't just a cloud, it's a rainbow. But it isn't there, you could pass your hand through it. I mean, what does that mean? Then as the air, wherever the soul may stop in its new hour, the air about it takes on that soul's image. Such is the virtue of the formative power. Okay, they're still in the air in purgatory, and the soul takes on the shape that it had in the world, in a physical body, and forms that shape out of air by the power of the essential formative principle of the soul. Therefore, thereafter, in the same way one may see flame follow fire wherever it may shift. You light a match and you move it, and the fire follows it. The new form follows the soul eternally. From air it draws its visibility, hence it is called a shade. And out of air it forms the organs of sight, speech, and every sense. Thus we are able to speak and laugh, and thus we are able to weep such tears and breathe such sighs as you have seen and heard passing among us. As desire or other feelings move us, so our shades change their appearances, and that is the cause of what amazed you just below. That's why those people looked like they were starving, because their airy body was enacting what's going on in their souls. And that's why Virgil can carry Dante when he needs to, because he organizes the air into enough to support Dante. That's not a surprise if you think of wind tunnels and things like that. All right. The new spirit that God breathes into the soul is the substantial form of man, the rational human soul, with its possible intellect. It is created individually and directly by God and implanted in the embryo as soon as the brain is sufficiently formed to receive it. So that's why there aren't three souls in us. There's only one. It's that soul breathed into us by God that unifies all the other functions into itself. Okay. As we saw earlier, the human soul does not lose at death either its individuality or the faculties which it has taken up from the vegetative and animal souls with which it has compounded. It is still alive and sensitive and self-aware. But the lower faculties which need body for their expression are left passive or in potentia. The higher, those which share the nature of spiritual forms, remain active, and all the keener for being no longer obliged to express themselves through a material medium. Okay. (26) This is more on the embrace that you were shocked about. As with the fire, so with the exchanged embrace. Let me see. Talking about human laws. Okay. As with the fire, so with the exchanged embrace, the image of the sin is also the image and means of the remedy. Remember, we're always seeing Dante enacting the sin but not in a bad way, or enacting the penance but not in a bad way. At each level there's this suggestion, there's a way to do this that isn't the full-on punishment or the full-on penance. More clearly here than in any other cornice, we are shown what Virgil has already told us, that love is the root of virtue and vice alike. The purging fires burn off the dross, and the good that remains is the good that lay always at the heart of the sin. The swift exchange of kisses, reflected in the speed of the verse, contrasts with the exchanged kiss of Paolo and Francesca, the heedless dallying with temptation and the relaxed abandonment to indulgence. We read no more that day. Between these two kisses, damnation and salvation swing balanced. So the whole universe that we've been through, between that first erotic love that was not repented and is punished in the winds of hell, and this fire which is purging away any dross left in the loving soul, Those two kisses are in every individual, the difference between salvation and damnation. The kiss of love versus the kiss of lust. All right, the laws. At line 82, Canto 26, line 82, we were hermaphroditic in our offenses, but since we did not honor human laws, yielding like animals to our lusting senses, we, when we leave the other band, repent by crying our shame to the name of her who crouched in the mock beast with a beast's intent. That's paciphai. So we've got the whips, the whip and the bridle related to in the form of these cries that they're calling out. But when he says we did not honor human laws, so I made a copy of this for you. The Medieval Derivation of Law, and I'm going to read it quickly. Well, there are two there. See if you can separate that. This is from the back. This is the appendix in Sayers. I'll give you two. I have plenty tonight because of the rain, I guess. Do you want two or one? Okay. All right, so this is the medieval understanding of the nature of law. And law is the very broad term. This is all from St. Thomas Aquinas. The ultimate source of all law is the eternal law, the lex aeterna. That's at the top of your chart. The ultimate, which is the will of God, binding upon the whole created universe. It includes both the principles of morality and what we nowadays mean by the laws of nature. The eternal law is made known to man in two forms. The lex divina, the divine law, by the special revelation of Scripture, and the natural law, lex naturalis, imprinted on every human soul by general revelation. So these are two forms of revelation. Lex divina is, look at the third level down. So we got morality and laws of nature. And then coming down from lex aeterna is lex divina, the divine law, and the natural law. So that's what is revealed to any rational human being. That's natural law. And what is revealed to people who've received the revelation from Scripture. And that's divine law. This is the participation. So natural law is the participation of the rational creature in eternal law. The popular misuse of the phrase natural law to connote the laws of nature is inaccurate and misleading and should be strongly discouraged. So see the difference she makes between laws of nature above and natural law. In obedience to the natural law, the rational creature accepts that part of the eternal law which assigns to the sexes their proper functional relations, and to which the animals likewise conform instinctively under the laws of nature. Sodomy is thus a sin against the natural law. So, and it's also that by which, a cow knows its own heifer, and the heifer knows to suck from the cow. It's built into the nature of things. The human law, lex humana, derives insofar as it is just from the natural law and comprises those principles of morality which are proper for the regulation of specifically human conduct, though not necessarily applicable to animals. Okay, so human beings invent laws that are consistent, if they're just, consistent with natural law. Thus, theft, for example, and in the sphere of sexual morality, fornication, adultery, and incest, are actions innocent in animals, though forbidden to man, not only by the divine law, because God says don't do this, but also, though with varying codes of behavior, by the human law. Human beings get together and establish the law of the city that says, you can't do this. We're going to punish you if you do it. This is all coming through Guido Guinicelli, the poet of the previous generation. Guinicelli explains that he and his companions, while innocent of offense against the natural law, so he sees him in the fire, Guinicelli, this poet of love, sinned by indulging as though they were brute beasts in lusts which contravene the human law. Their bridle is accordingly taken from the evil example of Pasiphae, who, though in a sense more literal than theirs, made a beast of herself by mating with a bull. All right, under Lex Divina, you see here the Old Law and the New Law, so that's the Old Testament, the New Testament. And under human law, which derives from divine law and natural law, you have the rights of nations, jus gentium, and civil law, jus civile, the laws between nations and universal, and the laws of the particular city or state. All right, questions? So that's this short course on medieval concept of law. Now, the lawyers in the audience will be able to look at this and show where all of our laws are rooted. All of our laws exist as they do because they've inherited, whether people know it or not, this conception of the nature of law. Okay, Canto 27. It is the peculiarity of the seventh cornice that all souls, whether or not they are detained there to purge the sin of lust, are compelled to pass through and suffer its torment of fire before ascending the pass. So Dante didn't have to suffer any of the particular penances on the various cornices below, but in this level, he's going to have to go through the fire, and everyone does, because it's a ring of fire all the way around the mountain, and you can't get in to go up to the garden, man's first garden of Eden, without going through this fire. Oi, so he's petrified. Line 10, Canto 27. Enter the fire and heed the singing from the other side. They're singing Beati Mundo Corde. Those were his words to us when we had come near as we could, and hearing them I froze, as motionless as one laid in his tomb. I was like dead. I lean forward over my clasped hands and stare into the fire, thinking of human bodies I once saw burned, and once more see them there. Burning was one of the punishments that the city could impose on heretics and others. My kindly escorts heard me catch my breath and turned, and Virgil said, "Within that flame there may be torment, but there is no death. Think well, my son, what dark ways we have trod. I guided you unharmed on Geryon, and shall I do less now we are nearer God? What are you afraid of? I've been taking you through all this stuff. Believe this past all doubt. Were you to stay within that womb of flame 1,000 years, it would not burn a single hair away." In other words, you're not going to ultimately suffer for it. It's going to be painful, but you're not going to die. And if you still doubt my sincerity, but reach the hem of your robe into the flame, your hands and eyes will be your guarantee. So you want incarnated proof, because a human being needs that when he lives in the body. Put the hem of your gown into the fire, and you'll see it doesn't burn up. My son, turn here with whole assurance. Put by your fears and enter into your peace. And I stood fixed at war in my own conscience. Can't do it. Too scary. Why? What does it mean allegorically? Okay, fine. You don't want to step into the fire. We get that. What does it mean to be purged of this excess love of persons? What does it mean to be purged of lust? We experience ourselves as essentially tied to that desire and that fulfillment, and to imagine it being purged and burnt away so we don't have that anymore, then what are we? He's still stuck in this attachment to that in love, which is not totally devoted to God. And loving Beatrice or any woman ultimately for the sake of God. And seeing me still stubborn, rooted fast, Virgil says, a little troubled, think, my son, you shall see Beatrice when this wall is passed. Boom. As Pyramus, but one breath from the dead, opened his eyes when he heard Thisbe's name and looked at her with the mulberry turned red, when the mulberry turned red, just so my hard paralysis, they did die, of course, that was a disaster. Just so my hard paralysis melted from me, and I turned to my leader at that name, which wells forever in my memory. Wells, like water. At which he wagged his head as at a child won over by an apple. An apple. Then he said, well then, what are we waiting for? And smiled. He turned then and went first into the fire, requesting Statius, who for some time now had walked between us, to bring up the rear. Like, I'm going to go in front of him, you go behind him, and make sure that he does. There's no other way to go unless you fall off the mountain, right? Once in the flame, I gladly would have cast my body into boiling glass to cool it against the measureless fury of the blast. That's how painful it was. But he makes it through. From the point of view of the story, Dante is here very skillfully and economically combines several themes in one. The fire, in fact, exercises a triple function. A, it forms the penance of the cornice, we know that. B, it represents the flaming sword of the cherubim who guard the entrance to the Garden of Eden. You remember when Adam and Eve were kicked out, God set an angel at the gate with a flaming sword not to let them back in. And this is the flame that's keeping people out of the Garden of Eden. And C, it provides the pass of peril, which in so many folk tales of otherworld journeys, the hero has to leap through in order to attain the lady or any other object of his search. Allegorically, since every sin is a sin of love, the purgation of love itself is a part of every man's penitence. Okay, now, night, sun goes down, can't move. He's made it through the fire, can't go into the garden. So he has a dream, the last dream on Purgatory. Line 97 of Canto 27. I dreamed I saw a maiden, innocent and beautiful, who walked a sunny field gathering flowers and caroling as she went. Say, I am Leia, if any ask my name, and my white hands weave garlands, wreath on wreath, to please me when I stand before the frame of my bright glass. For this my fingers play among these blooms. But my sweet sister Rachel sits at her mirror motionless all day. To stare into her own eyes endlessly is all her joy, as mine is in my weaving. She looks, I do. Thus live we joyously. All right, so who are these two ladies? Rachel and Leia are the two wives of Jacob. And they figure the active life and the contemplative life. The life of helping in the world to allow those who are called to the contemplative life to contemplate. And her eyes, Leah's eyes in the Bible, were dim or troubled. Rachel was beautiful but barren. But barren at first. In mystical writings, particularly those of Richard of St. Victor, whom Dante places in the heaven of the sun, whom I quoted before, the two wives of Jacob are frequently interpreted as allegories, respectively, of the active and contemplative life. And that's their function in the dream. The active life is the Christian life lived in the world. It is abundantly fruitful in good works, but those who pursue it cannot see very far into the things of the Spirit, because as Martha, another type of the active life, they are cumbered with much serving, Mary and Martha in the Gospels. The contemplative life is that which is wholly devoted to prayer and the practice of the presence of God. That is the mystical contemplation of God. It is less prolific in good works than the active life, but the fruit it bears is the most precious of all. Leah bore Jacob 10 sons, but the 2 sons eventually born of Rachel were Joseph and Benjamin, the best beloved. The active life is in no way to be condemned. It is indeed necessary to the existence of the contemplative life. Leah must be wedded before Rachel, as in the biblical story. For if there were no Marthas to do the work of the world, Mary could never be nourished nor find leisure for contemplation. Nevertheless, Mary's is the better part, and the active life exists in a manner for the sake of the contemplative. The complete Christian life is a blend of action and contemplation, the former leading to the latter, and being subdued to it as the means to an end. Differing but complementary perfections. All right. Now, Virgil says at line 127, we're still in Canto 27. I'm going to try to make it to the end. Boy, how am I going to do it? My son, Virgil says, now you have seen the torment of the temporal and the eternal fires. Temporal fire is this one we just went through, because it'll be done by the day of judgment, and eternal fires in hell. Here now is the limit of my discernment. Virgil is saying, that's it. I've reached what I can tell you based on human reason. Okay, based on classical humanist reason. I have led you here by grace of mind and art. That's Virgil, mind and art. Now let your own good pleasure be your guide. You are past the steep ways, past the narrow part. See there the sun that shines upon your brow, so it's now morning after this dream. The sweet new grass, the flowers, the fruited vines which spring up without need of seed or plow. This is the Garden of Eden, everything provided. Until those eyes come, gladdened which in pain moved me to come to you and lead your way. Until Beatrice appears, the one who came to me to invite me to lead you here. Sit there at ease or wander through the plain. Expect no more of me in word or deed. Here your will is upright, free, and whole, and you would be in error not to heed whatever your own impulse prompts you to. Why? Because he's been symbolically purged. All the P's are gone, the last P wiped away in the fire, and he can't do wrong anymore. There's no more impulse of sin in him. So whatever he wants to do, now that he's in the garden, he can do. He can sit, he can wander, he can take a nap, he can whatever. Lord of yourself, I crown and mitre you. The crown is the symbol of the secular world's king, and the mitre the symbol of the church's bishop. And he's now the Lord of himself. Why? Because he is not going to make wrong decisions rooted in the 3 kinds of corruptions of love. Those are purged away. All right, 28. He comes to the earthly paradise. The scenery of Dante's earthly paradise is said to have been taken from the pineta, the pine wood of Chiasi, near Ravenna on the Adriatic, where the last cantos of the Purgatorio were written. That is, he's in exile, Dante, in Ravenna. Insofar as poets take their ideal scenery from any actual place, this is doubtless true, but it does not fully explain Dante's insistence on speaking always of the sacred forest, the ancient forest, and never employing the more usual and traditional image of a garden. We can scarcely doubt that he is deliberately making a parallel in contrast with the dark wood and the rough, stubborn forest from which he set out on his journey. And remember, in the very beginning. In the allegory, the earthly paradise is the state of innocence. It is from here that man, if he had never fallen, would have set out upon his journey to the celestial paradise, which is his ultimate destination. So Adam and Eve were created in this garden, and their destiny was to go up. And instead they fell, and they got kicked out, and they went down. Because of sin, his setting out is from that other forest, which is the degraded and horrifying parody of this one. That was the dark wood of error. His whole journey through hell and purgatory is thus a nostos, a return journey in search of his true starting place. The return to original innocence. Natural innocence is not an end in itself. That is, the goal of life is not the Garden of Eden. It is never intended that unfallen Adam should remain static, but that he should progress from natural to supernatural perfection. I think it is therefore a mistake to suppose, as many have done, that Dante's earthly paradise stands for the perfect empire, the perfect perfection of the active life, the felicity of this life, or even the perfection of the natural life, except in the sense that it represents the recovery of the original perfection of human nature, which was impaired by the fall. Once we remember that Eden is and was always meant to be a starting place and not a stopping place, we shall have little difficulty in finding a consistent and intelligible significance for the allegory. And then we meet a lady, and her name is Matilda, and nobody knows who she is. They've done study, and the conclusion is, we don't really know, but I suspect, and Dorothy Sayers believes, and I think she's right, that Matilda was a friend of Beatrice. She was one of those ladies that Dante wrote about in the Vita Nuova when he was seeing Beatrice on those various occasions. And she's kind of the Martha to Beatrice's Mary, or the Leia to her Rachel. She's a type of the active life. She forms part of Beatrice's retinue, and her obvious function is to prepare Dante for his meeting with Beatrice. Okay, now, the first thing she does is dip Dante in Lethe. What is Lethe? The river of forgetfulness. And it's classical. It comes right straight from Homer. But Dante makes a twist on it. What is forgotten when you're dipped in Lethe here? So now we have a fountain, and the fountain bubbles up, and there are two streams that come from it. One goes this way, one goes this way. And Dante's dipped first in the first one, and then later, after the pageants, he's going to be dipped in the second one. And Dante invents the second one. It doesn't exist in the classical world. He calls it eunoi, meaning good spirit, or good soul, or good mind. So what the effect of being dipped in Lethe is it washes away the memory of sin. And the effect of eunoi is it restores the memory of sin only for the good. So you see the good that has come out of it. Since you've repented, you wouldn't be here if you hadn't. So you see the good that came out of it, and it doesn't hurt anymore. So it's not like you're living in a false world where you don't remember what you did. you remember what you did, but you see how it was meant to be. All right. Now, there are two pageants. What is a pageant? They're actually masks, meaning allegorical performances by spirits, all of whom are enacting a role for the sake of Dante, and presumably for Statius, who's with him. And each role they perform has allegorical significance, like the masks performed in the Middle Ages and into the Renaissance in the towns and cities and courts, where the actors would dress up as different mythological characters and enact various little dramas, each of them being meaningful. Readers who have followed with interest Dante's use of natural as opposed to conventional symbols for the purpose of his allegory, remember I read you that part of the introduction at the beginning, now have an opportunity to see what he could, if he thought fit, do with the other method, and how he uses the one as a contrast and foil to the other. For the great focal point of the Commedia, the reunion of Dante with Beatrice, is deliberately set as though upon a stage between two great pageants or masks, in which the characters are not symbolic personages, but allegorical personifications in the traditional manner, embodying abstract ideas. So that the spirits, the angels or spirits, are enacting an allegorical abstraction. When I say masks, she says, I mean exactly that. I do not mean that Dante has suddenly changed his convention and introduced into his narrative a whole collection of abstractions who mingle with his real people on equal terms. I mean that the angels and intelligences whom he mentions in the course of these concluding cantos are, in the most literal sense, maskers, performers, who represent before him a contrived pageant in the contemporary fashion, his contemporary fashion, for his personal instruction and to the honor of Beatrice and all she stands for. The persons are still actual existent beings, as all actors are existent beings, but they are actors and they are presenting a show. Between them, the two masks display the history of the church, one, up to and including the Incarnation, that's the first one, and two, the second one after he sees Beatrice, from the days of the apostles to the time of writing, 1300, when the story takes place. The first is primarily doctrinal, the second historical and political. The first mask is the mask of the pageant of the Sacrament. I have called it so because this description agrees best with its formal presentation, but what it shows is something still greater. The whole revelation of the indwelling of Christ in his creation through the union of his two natures, divine and human, technically known as the hypostatic union. Of this union, the sacrament of the altar. Remember I was talking about sacraments before? So what is a sacrament? It's a mystical union between a physical action with something in your hands in this world and the spiritual, mystical meaning inhering in it. Of this union, the sacrament of the altar is at once the divinely ordained symbol and the means by which Christians participate in that union. You take communion, you are participating in the union of the human and divine in Christ. And in the Mass, Beatrice, Dante's own particular God-bearing image, that's a really important idea, plays the part of the sacrament. It is at this point that mask and reality become inextricably welded into a single dominating image. For the historical Beatrice is, for Dante, what she represents, just as after a higher and universal manner, the sacrament is what it represents. And after a manner more absolute still, Christ is what he represents. So, this is the whole principle of sacrament. The Eucharist, the Eucharistic wafer and wine, are symbols of the participation in the mystical union of divinity and humanity in Christ. But they also are that because of what's called transubstantiation, right? It is the body of Christ. It's not just a symbol of the body of Christ. It becomes actually the body of Christ. And so eating it, you are not only engaging in a symbol, which you are doing, but you are also engaging in a reality. And that reality is the recapitulation of the mystical reality of the meaning of Christ. All right, so I can go through the various symbols, and I'm going to try to do it quickly because I want to finish tonight. So we get candlesticks. The form in which the mask is presented is in general outline that of a Corpus Christi procession. Corpus Christi means the body of Christ. The Feast of Corpus Christi in honor of the Blessed Sacrament had been promulgated for the whole church by Pope Urban IV in 1264, reauthorized later. The 7 processional torches were used in the Mass, papal Mass, now, then in any Mass. And they represent the 7 candlesticks represent the 7 gifts of the Spirit: wisdom, understanding, counsel, might, knowledge, piety, and the fear of the Lord. Virgil doesn't know what's going on. Never heard of this, doesn't get it. 24 elders. Who are they? They are each a book of the Old Testament, as grouped by St. Jerome. 12 minor prophets, Samuel, Kings, Chronicles, each, Ezra, Nehemiah, or Nehemiah being grouped together as one. They are crowned with lilies of righteousness. So this is all the old dispensation. Then there are 4 living creatures, 4 beasts of the apocalypse from Revelation, the 4 traditional emblems of the 4 evangelists. So there's the ox, the lion, the man, and the what? Eagle. In Ezekiel, each cherub has 4 faces and 4 wings, etc. There's all elaboration. And the centerpiece of the mask is the triumph car, on which, supported by the testimony of the evangelists, the mystery of the incarnation will be displayed. So in the medieval Corpus Christi pageant, so all these allegorical figures pull this cart, and the cart is carrying the host in it. It's going to the church to become the host for the Mass. So at this central point in the Corpus Christi procession, let's see. The mystery of the incarnation is displayed, okay, in the triumph car. At this central point in the Corpus Christi procession, the Holy Host would normally be carried under a canopy. But for the canopy, Dante has substituted a carroccio, a war chariot, and has then belonged to every Italian city. This is the triumph car of the church. The griffin pulling this cart, this chariot, is half eagle and half lion. And he represents the hypostatic union. So pulling the body of Christ and the church is the griffin, Christ as both man and God. So far as he is a bird, divine, he is of gold, incorruptible. So far as he is animal, human, he is mingled of red and white. White and red are the colors which Dante assigns to the Old and New Testaments, respectively. So that here again, he emphasizes the meaning of the 2 dispensations in the incarnation. They are also the colors of righteousness and love, but they are most especially the colors of the sacrament itself, the flesh, white, and the blood, red, of the sacrament, of the Eucharist. Then there are 3 ladies walking on one side, and these are the theological virtues: faith in white, hope in green, and charity in red. I think Chardy gets 2 of those colors backwards. And then there are the 4 in purple. And those are the 4 cardinal virtues: justice, prudence, temperance, and fortitude. In her forehead she had 3 eyes. Prudence has 3 eyes. The third eye of wisdom, which we see in Buddha as well. All right, so they're pulling on this cart, not a chalice with the Eucharist in it, with the wafers in it, but who? Beatrice. So now I'm going to read about the figure of Beatrice. And it's to this that we have been leading all through the allegory. If throughout the whole course of the poem our minds had not been insistently prepared for the coming of Beatrice, the whole symbolism of the Mask, and particularly the chanting of the Benedictus, would lead us to expect the appearance upon the car of the Holy Host itself. And both expectations are quite right. What appears is indeed Beatrice, as we had been led to suppose. But she is also, in the allegory of the Mask, the image of the host. In this august and moving moment, Dante brings together all the significations of Beatrice, showing her as the particular type and figure of that whole sacramental principle of which the host itself is the greater image. Bearing in mind the 4 levels at which Dante meant his poem to be interpreted, we see that she is here. Okay, 1, literal, the Florentine woman whom Dante loved. It's Beatrice's soul appearing to him again. Remember, he was abashed that she died. He didn't follow her in his mind up to heaven. He started being distracted by the things of the world. We're going to hear him say so. So that's the literal level. It's Beatrice. Morally, as regards the way of salvation of the individual soul, she is the type of whatever is for each of us the God-bearing image, which manifests the glory of God in his creation and becomes a personal sacramental experience. Everyone who has any living sense of the glory or the presence of God has had an experience where that is born in him or her. And it could be anything. It could be the birth of a child. It could be a sunset. It could be something in nature. It could be somebody that said something once. It could be meeting a saint. It could be anything that for that person becomes the image of what then is represented by it, namely the reality of the divine. 3, historically, so that this is at the allegorical level. In the world of human society, the sacrament of the altar, she represents the sacrament of the altar. And those who say that Beatrice here represents the church are not wrong, for Dante has in mind that ancient and apostolic conception of the Eucharist, which looks upon it not only as the commemoration of God's single act in time, but as the perpetual presentation to God in Christ of Christ's true body, the church, the verum corpus, which is made in the offertory of the bread and wine, so that, as St. Augustine says, being joined to his body and made his members, we may be what we receive. Okay, so that's the allegorical level. She is, in that sense, the church and the Eucharist of the church. Finally, 4, mystically, as regards the way of the soul's union with God, the whole principle of affirmation, she represents the whole principle of affirmation, whereby that union is effected in and through all the images. So the principle is, yes, I believe that this is that. I believe that this represents God. I believe that the sacrament contains the mystical thing that its physical enactment is intended to represent. Shakespeare does this in the end of the Tempest, when he writes the epilogue to the Tempest, and he wants the audience to clap. As you from crimes would pardon be, let your indulgence set me free. And then we clap. And we're doing 4 things. We are sending Prospero back to Milan. We are sending the actor home to dinner. We are sending the author into retirement. And we are approving of the doctrine of forgiveness of sin. As we want to be forgiven, we forgive the actors, we forgive the playwright, we forgive anything we didn't like in the play, and we clap. And in our clapping, we are enacting that principle of forgiveness and of our will to be united with it. It's the most allegorically rich thing in Shakespeare, I think. Okay. So, having said thus much, we may admire the poetic tact with which Dante leaves the whole weight of this allegorical structure to be carried on the framework of the masque, so that he is free to conduct the interview between Dante and Beatrice in those human and personal terms which make the story dramatically effective. Canto 31. What happens? He's come all this way. Oh, Canto 30, I meant to say. Canto 30, line, say, 34. Dante says, "My soul such years had passed since last it saw that lady and stood trembling in her presence, stupefied by the power of holy awe. Now, by some power that shone from her above the reach and witness of my mortal eyes, felt the full mastery of enduring love." He loves her. He still loves her. And he loves her more than ever before. "The instant I was smitten by the force which had already once transfixed my soul before my boyhood years had run their course," that is, when he was 8, nearly 9, "I turned left with the same assured belief that makes a child run to its mother's arms when it is frightened or has come to grief, to say to Virgil, 'There is not within me one drop of blood unstirred. I recognize the tokens of the ancient flame.'" That's Beatrice. That's who I love. I still love her. Turns to Virgil, turns to the left. But he had taken his light from us. He had gone. Virgil had gone. Virgil, the gentle father to whom I gave my soul for its salvation. Not all that sight of Eden lost to view by our first mother, Eve, could hold back the tears that stained my cheeks so lately washed with dew. A couple of days ago, he had his cheeks washed with dew at the bottom of Purgatory. Now he's weeping again because Virgil's gone. And Beatrice speaks. "Dante, do not weep yet. Though Virgil goes, do not weep yet, for soon another wound shall make you weep far hotter tears than those." As an admiral takes his place at stern or bow to observe the handling of his other ships and spur all hands to do their best, so now on the chariot's left side I saw appear when I turned at the sound of my own name, which necessarily is recorded here. You're not supposed to name yourself in a great poem, you know? But he has to, because it's what she said. "That lady who had been half veiled from view by the flowers of the angel revels, now her eyes fixed me across the stream, piercing me through. And through the veil she still wore, held in place by the wreathed flowers of wise Minerva's leaves, let me see only glimpses of her face. Her stern," this is Beatrice, "her stern and regal bearing made me dread her next words, for she spoke as one who saves the heaviest charge till all the rest are read." You got plenty to cry for, and it isn't Virgil. "Look at me well, I am she, I am Beatrice. How dared you make your way to this high mountain? Did you not know that here man lives in bliss?" Wait, you're telling me you're mad at me? I came all this way? I lowered my head and looked down at the stream. But when I saw myself reflected there, remember that first step of penance, I fixed my eyes upon the grass for shame. So I can't even look at myself. I have to look at the lowest thing there is around here, which is the grass. I shrank as a wayward child in his distress shrinks from his mother's sternness, for the taste of love grown wrathful is a bitterness. She paused. At once the angel chorus sang the blessed psalm, In te Domine speravi, in you God we hope. Just so I froze. He talks about the mountains. Too cold for sighs or tears until I heard that choir whose notes are tuned to the eternal music of the spheres. But when I heard the voice of their compassion plead for me, more than if they had cried out, "Lady, why do you treat him in this fashion?" That's what they meant by singing that psalm. The ice which hard about my heart had pressed turned into breath and water and flowed out through eyes and throat in anguish from my breast. She was right. He's got more to weep about than the departure of Virgil. Now he's weeping full on. Still standing at the chariot's left side, she turned to those compassionate essences, the angels, who were singing this, whose song had sought to move her. They're singing this to say, have compassion on this poor guy. He loves you. And she's turning to them and she says, you keep your vigil in the eternal day, you spirits, where neither night nor sleep obscures from you a single step the world takes on its way. But I must speak with greater care, that he who weeps on that far bank may understand and feel a grief to match his guilt. All right, what is he guilty of? Thought he had all those P's wiped away. Well, this is the first time he can really see what he did wrong, because he doesn't have the P's looking, the sins looking. She says, that this man, line 115, potentially was so endowed from early youth that marvelous increase should have come forth from every good he sowed. But richest soil the soonest will grow wild with bad seed and neglect. For a while I stayed him with glimpses of my face, turning my mild and youthful eyes into his very soul. I let him see their shining, and I led him by the straight way, his face to the right goal. The instant I had come upon the sill of my second age and crossed and changed my life, he left me and let others shape his will. That is, she died and came to heaven, and he forgets her. When I rose from the flesh into the spirit to greater beauty and to greater virtue, he found less pleasure in me and less merit. He turned his steps aside from the true way, pursuing the false images of good that promise what they never wholly pay. Not all the inspiration I won by prayer and brought to him in dreams and meditations, all he records in the Vita Nuova and elsewhere, could call him back, so little did he care. He fell so far from every hope of bliss that every means of saving him had failed, except to let him see the damned. This is where you're headed. For this I visited the portals of the dead and poured my tears and prayers before that spirit by whom his steps have up to now been led. That's Virgil. The seal Almighty God's decree has placed on the rounds of his creation would be broken were he to come past Lethe and to taste the water that wipes out the guilty years without some scot of penitential tears. All right, so he can't be dipped in Lethe and forget his sins until he sees really what they are and is truly penitent. You, Canto 31, who stand upon the other side, speak up, is it true? You have to confess and give evidence. He stands, he can't speak. Speak up. Confusion joined into terror forced the broken line 13. Broken, yes, from my throat, so weak that only one who read my lips would know I had spoken. Boom, it snaps. He pours out a flood of tears, and she says, filled as you were with the desire I taught you for that good, beyond which nothing exists on earth to which man may aspire, namely God, what yawning moats or what stretched chain links lay across your path to force you to abandon all hope of pressing further on your way? What increase or allurement seemed to show, etc. Finally, he says in tears, the things of the world's day, line 34, the things of the world's day, false pleasures and enticements, turned my steps as soon as you had ceased to light my way. She says, okay, now that you've admitted this, you're going to be all right. 49, line 49. Nothing in art or nature could call forth such joy from you as sight of that fair body which clothed me once and now sifts back to earth. And if my dying turned that highest pleasure to very dust, what joy could still remain in mortal things for you to seek and treasure? At the first blow you took from such vain things, your every thought should have been raised to follow my flight above decay. Once you've had that experience of the God-bearing image and realized what's real, how can you turn away from that to pursue the things of the world? At the first blow you took from such vain things, your every thought should have been raised to follow my flight above decay, nor should your wings have been weighed down by any joy below, love of a maid, or any other fleeting and useless thing to wait a second blow. He's tongue-tied for shame. If to hear me grieves you, now raise your beard. You're a grown man, raise your beard, and let your eyes show you a greater cause for misery. And what does he see? Even veiled and across the river from me, her face outshone its first self by as much as she outshone all mortals formerly. So this is why you shouldn't have turned away from me, because look at me now. And she's more beautiful, even behind the veil. Okay, then he gets dipped in Lethe. Now I'm going to speed to the end because we're out of time. He gets dipped in Lethe, and he sees the second pageant. And it's a pageant of the history of the church from the incarnation on. And it's all symbolic. The church is carried by a pole, which is a cross, and the cross is lifted up and tied to the tree, which is the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, from which it was thought that the cross was made. And then you have the invasion, the descent and invasion of the eagle, which is Roman justice punishing, and then you have the seven-headed beast and the whore of Babylon, and all of that comes in this pageant to indicate that the trials and sufferings of the church. All right, and then in the last canto, Dante says, so she's talking about his sin and repentance and everything's good now. And she says at line 82, or he says, why do your desired words fly so high above my power to follow their intent, that I see less and less the more I try? She said, you have to know how far beyond my words is the reality. He says, but I replied, I have no recollection of ever having been estranged from you. Conscience does not accuse me of defection. I never turned away from you. I don't remember that. And she goes, aha! You were just dipped in Lethe. The fact that you don't remember it means it was a sin, because Lethe washes away sin. And then he gets dipped in Eunoe. And he remembers everything but for the good. And then Dante finishes at 136. Reader, had I the space to write at will, I should, if only briefly, sing a praise of that sweet draught, that drink, would I were drinking still. But I have filled all of the pages planned for this my second canticle, and art pulls at its iron bit with an iron hand, just as the watch is pulling me with an iron bit. I came back from those holiest waters, new, remade, reborn, like a sun-wakened tree that spreads new foliage to the spring dew, in sweetest freshness, healed of winter scars, perfect, pure, and ready for the what? The stars. Let's hear that a little bit in Italian. Io ritornai dalla santissima onda, rifatto siccome piante novelle, rinnovellate di novella fronde, puro et disposto a salire alle stelle. Rifatto, remade, novelle, new plants, piante novelle, rinnovellate, renewed, di novella fronde, with new leaves. So it's spring. It's suddenly spring. His soul is now experienced this rebirth. And ready, disposto, puro e disposto, pure and prepared, ready to mount, to climb up to the stars. All right, questions. I'll stay and take questions if you have them, if you're willing to stay and hear. It's a pretty close call. I couldn't really do justice to the second pageant, but you can read the notes. It's all there. Yes? No, you're worn out. You're
It's exhausting climbing the mountain of Purgatorio.
very, yes, very. Not to mention going through that fire. Scary. All right, well, let me, as you leave, I'll give you the organization of Paradiso, and we will meet on a week from tonight, 7 o'clock, and begin the climb through paradise. If you thought these ideas were hard, now we're going to the realm of what is known by faith and revelation. It's no longer enough to use our reason. We can only see clearly in the it's going to be increasing degrees of knowledge based on revelations, more and more revelations rooted in the faith. Okay, thank you for being here. I appreciate it very much.
Thank you.